Have you ever sat in silence, knowing exactly what you need to do yet doing absolutely nothing? You're not lazy, you're not weak, you're just stuck. And here's the truth no one talks about. The longer you wait to act, the harder it gets. Not because your life gets harder, but because your brain is learning that hesitation is safer than movement. That's biology, that's neuroscience, and it's rewiring you to stay small. Imagine standing at the edge of a cold ocean. Your goal is on the other side. You know the water will sting. You know the swim will burn. But here's the thing. Every second you stall, the fear grows teeth. And before long, it doesn't just whisper, it roars. This isn't the right time. You're not ready. What if you fail? Sound familiar? This isn't motivation. It's neural circuitry. Your brain is designed to conserve energy, avoid danger, and seek comfort. So when you hesitate, even for a few seconds, your prefrontal cortex starts to flood your mind with doubt. It's a survival mechanism, but in today's world, comfort is the enemy of growth. Here's the breakthrough. Action changes the brain. Movement kills fear. Decision silences doubt. When you take action, even a tiny step, your brain releases dopamine, not just the chemical of pleasure, but of momentum. Dopamine is the neurochemical of progress. It says, yes, you're on the path. Keep going. And the more often you move, the more the brain rewires for courage. You start to crave progress, you start to seek challenge, you start to break the loop. So what's the habit? You force yourself to move before your brain talks you out of it. You count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you act. Send the message, take the cold shower, get up and walk. Speak the truth, launch the idea, not because you feel ready, but because action creates readiness. Think of your brain like a GPS. It can't calculate a route unless you're moving. You can't steer a parked car. The direction becomes clear after the motion begins, not before. Let me take you inside a moment. It's 6 a.m. Your alarm rings. Your body says stay in bed. Your brain offers every excuse. You didn't sleep well. You deserve rest. Try tomorrow. But somewhere buried beneath that noise, there's a whisper. Get up. You need this. Let's go. That's your prefrontal cortex fighting to rewire you. Every time you ignore that whisper, it weakens. But every time you obey that whisper, it grows stronger. That's not willpower. That's neuroplasticity. You are literally sculpting a new identity. One step, one decision, one yes at a time. Asterisk, most people assume they're stuck because they lack motivation, or they're missing the right plan, the right time, the right mindset. But the truth is far deeper and far simpler. You're not stuck because of a lack of clarity or opportunity. You're stuck because your brain has learned that not acting is safer than acting. This isn't just psychology, it's neurobiology. It's the way the human nervous system has evolved to preserve energy and avoid perceived threats. The problem is, in a modern context, this protective instinct becomes a cage. It traps you in patterns that feel safe but actually erode your potential over time. Every time you hesitate, your brain interprets that pause as uncertainty. And uncertainty, to the brain, is a signal of possible danger. The moment you overthink a meaningful action, the amygdala, the part of your brain that processes fear, lights up. It starts whispering reasons to hold back. It doesn't distinguish between real danger and psychological discomfort. Whether you're standing at the edge of a cliff or thinking about submitting a job application, your brain evaluates risk through the same neural circuits. The more often you choose inaction, the more robust those neural pathways become. You're literally training your brain that avoiding action is the safest response. Over time, that response gets automatic, and that's how you stay stuck, not just mentally, but neurologically. Now, here's what's critical to understand. The human brain is not hardwired in a fixed way. It's dynamic. It changes based on what we do or don't do. Every moment of hesitation, every time you choose comfort over movement, you are reinforcing the circuitry of avoidance. The default mode network, responsible for introspection and daydreaming, becomes dominant. You get caught in loops of analysis, self-doubt, regret, and projection. Your system favors thought over behavior. But this system, when left unchecked, it becomes a trap. It convinces you that thinking more will eventually lead to acting. But the reality is, thinking without acting just strengthens the paralysis. On the flip side, action, any form of decisive movement, engages completely different neural systems. The prefrontal cortex, which governs executive function, planning, and decision-making, gets activated. When you move your body toward a goal, even something as simple as standing up with intention or taking a cold shower, you trigger a surge of dopamine, the neuromodulator of motivation. But it doesn't just feel good. It tells your brain, We're progressing. Dopamine reinforces behavior. It creates a loop that rewards motion. And here's the key. That loop gets stronger with repetition. This is not about just doing it. That's a slogan. What we're talking about is teaching the brain through lived experience that action is not only possible but beneficial. You're building what neuroscientists call adaptive circuitry, neural pathways that bias you toward action. Over time, this makes movement feel less threatening and more automatic. The fear doesn't go away completely, but your relationship to fear changes. You stop waiting for the fear to disappear. You learn to act alongside it. Let's put it into real terms. You're sitting at your desk. You know you need to make a call that could change your life. Apply for that program. Pitch your idea. Ask for help. And you freeze. Not because you don't want it, but because your brain has learned that discomfort equals danger. That call represents uncertainty, and your brain would rather default to what it knows: emails, scrolling, mindless tasks, because those actions don't trigger the amygdala. But what happens when you do make the call? When you act before your brain talks you out of it? There's a split second of chaos. Your heart races, your hands sweat, but then something powerful happens. Dopamine is released. You feel alive. You feel progress. That's your nervous system being re-educated. The more often you lean into this discomfort, the more efficiently your brain builds what's known as top-down control. Your thinking overrides your primal response. This isn't about discipline in the conventional sense. It's about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself based on experience. When you repeatedly take action in the face of fear, you're sculpting a new brain, one that doesn't default to safety, but to expansion. Here's something fascinating. Studies on people who regularly take action under stress: firefighters, athletes, entrepreneurs, show increased insular activation. The insula processes internal bodily signals. When this part of the brain is trained through deliberate action, you become more attuned to discomfort, not to run from it, but to move with it. You begin to interpret the signals of fear, heart rate, sweat, tension, not as reasons to stop, but as markers of growth. Your body becomes the compass, not the cage. So when you feel stuck, understand, the problem isn't your situation, it's the neural conditioning underneath your habits. And the solution is not to wait until you feel better or more motivated. That moment may never come. Motivation is not the fire you wait for, it's the fire you build by striking friction against resistance. In practice, this means taking one uncomfortable step, even when every cell in your body screams no. It means standing up before the excuse finishes forming. It means doing the hard thing, not for the outcome, but for the rewiring. Think of your neural pathways like trails in a forest. The more you walk a path, the clearer and faster it becomes. If the only path you walk is hesitation, that trail gets wide, smooth, automatic. But the moment you carve out a new path, action, bravery, movement, it's awkward, unclear, slow at first, but with every repetition the terrain becomes easier. Eventually your dominant trail changes. You go from someone who overthinks to someone who moves. That's not a mindset, that's neurobiology in action. And this is why the phrase "force yourself to take action" isn't just motivational fluff. It's a prescription for changing the structure and function of your brain. It's how you flip the switch from reactive to proactive, from anxious to resilient, from stuck to in motion, not through thinking, not through wishing, but through doing. Every step, no matter how small, is a vote for the kind of brain and the kind of life you want to live. Most people don't realize that every decision they make or avoid making is driven by a complex interplay between two systems in the brain. One is ancient and fast. It acts out of fear, pattern recognition, and habit. The other is newer, more deliberate, and capable of overriding fear, but only when it's trained. And this is where the difference lies between those who move and those who remain stuck. The science of decision-making isn't just about logic. It's about which system in your brain gains dominance at the moment of action. You are biologically wired to freeze in the face of uncertainty, but you are also biologically equipped to overcome it. That's the conflict. And that's also the opportunity. Let's look at what happens inside the brain when you face a decision, especially one that feels big or emotionally loaded. The moment you perceive risk, your limbic system activates, specifically the amygdala, which rapidly assesses threats and initiates a protective response. This is the same structure that once kept our ancestors alive by avoiding predators or hostile environments. But in modern life, the threat is often psychological. Failure, embarrassment, rejection. Yet your brain reacts to it with the same alarm bells it would ring if you were being chased through the jungle. And what's the default behavior? Avoid, delay, rationalize, stay put. That's the circuitry of safety. That's how the brain protects you from what it believes might hurt you, even if it's the very thing you need. Now, enter the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for complex planning, goal-directed behavior and regulation of emotional responses. This part of your brain can suppress the fear impulse and replace it with intentional action. It can override the amygdala. But here's the challenge. It only activates when you consciously engage it. That means you have to decide to shift out of default mode. And in that gap between impulse and intention is the battlefield of progress. This is where you either reinforce fear-based wiring or build new decision-making circuitry based on clarity and purpose. People think decisive individuals are born confident. They're not. What they've done often without knowing is repeatedly strengthen the neural loop between intention and action. Each time they've pushed through hesitation, they've reinforced the prefrontal cortex's dominance over the limbic system. Over time, they've literally reshaped the way their brain handles uncertainty. This isn't mindset, it's neuroplasticity, and it's available to anyone willing to step into that uncomfortable moment and act, again and again, until action becomes reflex. Let's make this tangible. You're facing a decision. Change careers, start a project, end a relationship, take a risk. You feel the tension. Your chest tightens. You start scanning the possible outcomes. What if I fail? What will they say? What if it's the wrong move? That's your amygdala working perfectly. It wants to delay action until the danger disappears. But you have to remember, certainty is not a prerequisite for action. Waiting for all signals to go green is waiting forever. The prefrontal cortex only gets stronger when you act in spite of partial information. And when you do, it rewards you. Not just emotionally, but chemically. Taking action in the face of uncertainty triggers a release of dopamine. This is not just the pleasure chemical as it's often described. Dopamine is about motivation toward reward. It's what drives you to take the next step. And the beautiful thing is, it doesn't require success to be released. It's the act of moving forward that stimulates dopamine. So when you make a hard decision and take a bold step, your brain reinforces that behavior chemically. It says, yes, more of that. This is how momentum begins, not by thinking harder, but by doing something, anything, that aligns with your deeper aim. Now here's something critical. The brain is always learning from your behavior. When you avoid a hard decision, the brain logs that. It says, when we felt discomfort, we chose safety, and the next time a decision arises, it recalls that strategy. Avoid again, stay small. But when you override hesitation, even once, your brain logs that too. When we felt fear, we moved anyway, and now the brain starts considering a new possibility. Maybe action isn't danger. Maybe it's freedom. Every action becomes a signal to your nervous system about what kind of person you are. The more you choose aligned action, even when it's messy, incomplete, or scary, the more your identity begins to shift. Not just in your conscious thoughts, but in your brain's operating system. You stop seeing decisions as threats and start seeing them as opportunities to self-regulate and expand. The act of choosing becomes a muscle, and like any muscle, it grows through resistance. Let's go even deeper. Your ability to take decisive action is also influenced by something called prediction error, the difference between what your brain expects to happen and what actually happens. When you face a difficult decision, your brain often overestimates the threat and underestimates your capacity. But when you move forward and discover that wasn't so bad, the prediction error recalibrates the brain's fear response. Next time, the hesitation is smaller. And the more you accumulate these small prediction errors, the more resilient and flexible your decision-making system becomes. This is the neurobiology of confidence. It's not magic. It's math. Repeated exposures to fear followed by safe, productive outcomes. In moments of real growth, you'll feel resistance. That's normal. In fact, it's required. The anterior cingulate cortex, another part of the circuit, lights up when you're in cognitive conflict, when the easy choice and the hard choice battle it out. But this is also the window of transformation. It's when new circuits are formed, when the brain is most malleable. Your job in that moment is not to wait until it feels easy. Your job is to make the decision while your brain is still wrestling with uncertainty. That's how strength is built, not when conditions are ideal, but when you choose despite the internal noise. The reason people stay stuck isn't because they lack intelligence or resources. It's because they've rehearsed avoidance so many times that the path to action feels foreign. It's unpaved, and the brain resists the unfamiliar. But that doesn't mean you're broken. It means your circuits need reps. Just like muscles. In a gym, you lift, you rest, you recover, you adapt. Decision-making is no different. Each time you step toward discomfort and choose action, you're building a brain that knows how to respond under pressure. a brain that doesn't flinch when it matters. So if you want to change your life, change the way your brain processes choice. Understand that fear is a signal, not a stop sign. Use it as a trigger to engage your prefrontal cortex. Breathe, focus, decide. Don't wait for clarity, generate it. Don't wait for motivation, spark it. The moment you start to act, you start to think differently. You start to become different. Because your brain is always watching, always learning, always adapting, and every decision you make is training it for either momentum or stagnation. Choose momentum every single time. Fear is not the enemy. That's one of the most misunderstood ideas in human behavior. Fear isn't weakness. It's not a flaw in your system. It's actually the brain doing its job. The amygdala, that almond-shaped structure deep in the brain, which is constantly scanning for risk, alerting you to threats real or imagined. And it's important. You need it. It keeps you alive. But what people don't realize is that fear isn't a command. It's just a signal. It's a GPS. It's trying to tell you something about where growth lives, where discomfort meets opportunity. And when you begin to relate to fear not as a stop sign but as directional feedback, your entire internal experience changes. You stop running from it and start using it. The brain doesn't fear the action itself. It fears what it doesn't fully understand or predict. That's where the fear lives, in the uncertainty, in the ambiguity. You're not afraid of making the call. You're afraid of being judged. You're not afraid of launching the business. You're afraid of failing in front of people you care about. But here's the catch. The brain can't resolve that fear through more thinking. It resolves it only through exposure, by doing the thing and letting the nervous system adapt. That's called neuroplasticity, and it's your greatest tool for transformation. You cannot rewire fear by sitting still. You rewire fear by walking into it. The problem is, most people interpret the feeling of fear as a red light. Their heart rate goes up, their breathing quickens, and the internal dialogue kicks in. Maybe I'm not ready. Maybe this isn't the right time. That physiological cascade isn't a warning, it's activation. Your system is gearing up for performance. The same physiological state you feel before public speaking or making a big decision is almost identical to the one elite athletes experience before competition. The difference is, they've learned to interpret that state as excitement, as readiness, not as a reason to retreat. That shift in interpretation changes everything. Your brain and body are in a constant feedback loop. If you feel a racing heart and tell yourself I'm panicking, your brain will heighten the threat response. But if you feel that same heart rate and tell yourself, this means I'm stepping into something meaningful, your prefrontal cortex stays engaged, your focus sharpens, and your system adapts. You perform, you stretch, you grow. The fear becomes a signal of alignment, not avoidance. There's a concept in behavioral neuroscience called approach avoidance conflict. It's what happens when something you want is also something you fear. You're drawn to the opportunity, but repelled by the discomfort. Your system pulls in two directions, and that's exhausting. But here's what's remarkable. The simple act of taking a small, deliberate step toward the thing you fear shifts the brain into approach mode. That step doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to happen. That's what signals the brain. This fear is not fatal. And when you repeat that enough times, the fear no longer controls your behavior. This is why people who consistently grow aren't fearless. They just have a different relationship to fear. They use it. They listen to it, not to obey it, but to understand it. They recognize that fear often points to areas of untapped potential. If it didn't matter, you wouldn't feel anything. But because it matters, because it challenges your current identity, your nervous system reacts. That's the tension of transformation. And that's exactly where you need to go. Think about this. The greatest breakthroughs in your life likely followed periods of intense fear. The job you almost didn't apply for, the conversation you almost didn't have, the moment you almost stayed quiet but didn't. In those moments, you leaned into fear. You stepped into the signal, and that step led to expansion. Not because the fear disappeared, but because your system proved to your brain that you could, to survive it. That's neuroplasticity at work, not in theory, but in real-world behavior. What most people don't realize is that avoiding fear trains your brain to shrink. Every time you step back from something because it scares you, your brain logs that as reinforcement. That thing is dangerous, and next time it sends the signal louder. Over time, your world gets smaller, your decisions get safer, your potential dims. But when you lean into fear, even for a second, you break that loop. You open new pathways. You introduce your brain to a new narrative. This discomfort is data. This means I'm growing. And there's something else. The brain craves novelty. It thrives on challenge. When you face fear and move anyway, You engage the salience network, which helps the brain decide what deserves your attention. Fear combined with intentional action activates that network in a powerful way. You become more alert, more focused. You lock into the moment. And in that moment you're fully alive. That's not a metaphor. That's the brain in a high-performance state. It's trying to teach you something. This is where life is now. Imagine what happens if you start using fear as a map. If, instead of asking how can I get rid of this feeling, you ask, what is this pointing me toward? That one shift redefines your entire behavioral framework. Fear stops being the enemy. It becomes the compass. And every time you follow it not blindly but intentionally, you build a stronger, more adaptable nervous system. You can test this right now. Think of one thing you've been avoiding. A conversation, a commitment, a change. Now isolate the fear. What exactly scares you? Is it rejection, exposure, discomfort? Now ask, what would it look like to take one small step toward it, not to conquer it, but to become familiar with it. That step is how fear loses power. Not through resistance, but through exposure and familiarity. That's how the fear signal gets rewired from avoidance to approach. Here's what's profound. Fear never fully disappears, but your tolerance for fear increases. Your nervous system gets conditioned to operate under elevated states without collapsing into panic. This is resilience not as a mindset, but as a neurological capability, and it's built through deliberate practice. You don't wait to become fearless. You train your system to perform in the presence of fear. That's how you become unshakable. Because in the end, it's not about eliminating fear. It's about elevating your response. And that begins the moment you stop interpreting fear as a stop sign and start seeing it for what it really is. A signal that you are on the edge of becoming someone new. Asterisk change doesn't begin with a leap. It begins with a single step. That might sound like a cliché, but the brain doesn't operate in leaps. It operates in patterns, loops, and repetitions. And this is exactly why small, consistent steps don't just lead to change, they create it at the level of the nervous system. If you've ever wondered why massive effort followed by burnout doesn't get you results, while tiny, almost unnoticeable actions repeated daily seem to build unstoppable momentum, the reason is rooted in how your brain and body adapt over time. This is biology, and it's non-negotiable. We are wired for efficiency. The brain, which makes up about 2% of your body weight but consumes over 20% of your energy, doesn't want to waste resources on big, unsustainable surges. It prefers rhythm. It prefers consistency. It prefers patterns it can automate. When you take massive action sporadically, your brain experiences a surge of stress-related chemicals, cortisol, adrenaline, which can give you a temporary boost but eventually crash your system if not regulated. But when you take small, consistent steps, you allow the brain to safely rewire itself through a process called long-term potentiation, the strengthening of synaptic connections that make a behavior more automatic and less effortful over time. This is the core of habit formation. Every small step repeated becomes a micro-message to the nervous system that says, this is who I am now. The brain learns through behavior, not intention. You don't become disciplined by thinking about discipline. You become disciplined by showing up, even when it's inconvenient. Especially when it's inconvenient. When you train in those moments, you teach the prefrontal cortex to stay online, to stay engaged, under stress, fatigue, boredom. That's the muscle of mental toughness, and it's built rep by rep, not in some sudden moment of inspiration. Let's ground this in something real. Think about brushing your teeth. You do it daily. You don't need motivation. You don't need a calendar reminder. Why? Because it's been encoded into your procedural memory through repetition. Now imagine if movement, focus, deep work, or courageous communication became just as automatic. That's possible, but not through willpower alone. Through structure and consistency. That's how the brain moves behaviors from effortful to effortless, from conscious to unconscious, from the frontal cortex to the basal ganglia. That's the transition from struggle to habit. And here's what's powerful. You don't need to start big. In fact, it's better if you don't. Starting small keeps the amygdala, your fear and threat detection system, calm. When a goal feels too large or ambiguous, the amygdala sees it as danger and triggers avoidance. But when you present the brain with a manageable action, a 10-minute workout, 5 minutes of focused breathing, one uncomfortable email, it says, I can do that. And when you follow through, even on that tiny step, you release dopamine. That dopamine doesn't just make you feel good. It marks the behavior as valuable. It says, repeat this, and the loop begins. The key is to understand that progress compounds. This isn't motivational fluff, it's neuroscientific fact. Each time you repeat a small action, the underlying neural circuits become more efficient. The myelin sheath around those neurons thickens, allowing electrical signals to travel faster. That's how skill is built. That's how confidence is wired. It's not magic, it's mechanics, and it's available to everyone. But here's where people get it wrong. They expect results too fast. They quit when they don't see transformation in a week or a month. But that's like planting a seed and walking away because the tree didn't grow overnight. The brain is adapting, even when you can't see it. Neuroplasticity doesn't happen in a straight line. It's non-linear, invisible. But every time you take that small action, you are re-engineering your self-perception. You're no longer just someone who wants to change, you are someone who acts. And identity is the ultimate driver of behavior. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. A 20-minute focused session every day will rewire your brain more effectively than a 6-hour grind once a week. Because the brain values frequency over intensity for long-term adaptation. You are not what you do occasionally, you are what you do repeatedly. The brain is watching. It's learning, and it responds to what you feed it daily. Let's take the example of fear-based avoidance. If you avoid discomfort once, it doesn't seem like a big deal. But if you do it consistently, you build a brain that's optimized for escape, not engagement. Now flip that. If you take one brave step every day, even a small one, you build a brain that meets challenge with readiness. That's resilience, not as an idea, but as a physiological capacity. Your autonomic nervous system learns that discomfort doesn't mean danger, it means growth. And suddenly, hard things don't feel so hard, not because they change, but because you do. What happens? When you apply this principle across your life, you start waking up earlier not because it's easy, but because it's normal. You start having difficult conversations not because you love conflict, but because you value clarity. You start showing up for your body, your mind, your purpose, not because you're inspired every day, but because that's just who you are now, and the people around you start to notice. Your energy shifts, your decisions sharpen, your confidence deepens, not because you faked it, but because you trained it. The mistake is waiting to feel ready, waiting for the perfect plan, waiting for motivation. But motivation is not what gets you going, it's what shows up after you start. Dopamine is not released in advance of the action, it's released during the process. That's the feedback loop the brain needs, and once it gets a taste, it starts craving more. This is how you go from forcing yourself to do the hard thing to becoming the person who naturally chooses it. It's simple, but it's not easy. It requires intention. It requires structure. You might start with 2 minutes of journaling, a 1-minute cold shower, a daily walk. These aren't just tasks. They're neural statements, messages to the brain that you are in charge. Not your mood, not your environment, not your fear. And the more often you send that message, the more deeply it embeds into your identity. People underestimate the power of small steps because they're looking for immediate, external validation, but real transformation happens silently. It happens in the repetitions no one sees, in the discipline no one praises, in the moments where quitting would be easier, but continuing makes you stronger. And when those moments stack up day by day, breath by breath, you don't just change what you do, you change who you are, and that changes everything. So here it is, the inescapable truth. Your life, your growth, your future. They're not waiting in some far-off place. They're waiting right now, inside the decisions you avoid, inside the steps you postpone, inside the action you know you need to take but haven't. And if you keep waiting for the right moment, the perfect mindset, the ideal conditions, they will never come, because clarity doesn't precede action. Action creates clarity. The human brain isn't designed to reward those who overthink, it rewards those who move. You've learned that fear isn't your enemy, it's your compass. That hesitation isn't a weakness, it's an untrained signal. That small steps aren't insignificant, they are the only way your brain rewires itself for progress, for resilience, for change. You've heard the science: neuroplasticity, dopamine, the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala. But beneath all of that is something more powerful, something primal. The deep internal knowing that your potential is real, and that it can only be accessed through one thing: action. Whether it's one uncomfortable conversation, one decision to show up early, one email sent, 1 minute of courage in a storm of self-doubt, that's the threshold. That's the edge between who you are and who you could become. And every time you cross that edge, even trembling, even unsure, the nervous system adapts. The brain reorganizes. The identity shifts. You stop being someone who wishes for change and become someone who creates it. You don't have to overhaul your life in a day. In fact, if you try, you'll likely burn out. What you need is a decision, a choice to start moving, because movement is a message, not just to the world but to your own biology. It tells your brain, I'm in control now. I choose discomfort over regret. I choose effort over excuses. I choose action over fear. And here's the most powerful part. The first step is always the hardest, but it's also the only step that can lead to transformation. Not by magic, not by chance, but by wiring your brain to recognize that the cost of staying stuck is far greater than the pain of moving forward. So what's next? Not another video, not another plan, not another wait for motivation to strike. What's next is you doing the thing, the one thing, right now, before your brain talks you out of it. Before doubt becomes your default again, before fear wraps itself around your future like a chain. This is your moment to reclaim momentum, to stop negotiating with comfort, to stop hoping for permission, and to start building the person you were meant to become. Because at the end of the day, the choice is simple. Force yourself to take action, or stay stuck forever.